Um, Great time to join the conversation. You can go back and watch previous episodes of Torah study if you want, because there are now hundreds and hundreds of videos up there on Torah study and even on Midrash and even on Talmud that are up on our Temple Beth Ami site now. So you can go back and see some text, maybe stuff that you're interested in. But I want to say today, as we study, and sometimes it's appropriate and sometimes we don't have something to study for. But I also today want to recognize that today is the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. It's different than Yom HaShoah. International Holocaust Day was created by the United Nations about 20 years ago. Yom HaShoah was created by the nation of Israel 70 years ago. And so there's a different focus to them, different agenda to the holidays to some extent, but they're both unified as times where we remember and we think about the Shoah and about that part of history. So that's happening today. And so today, to some extent, all of us live in the shadow of the Shoah. We live in the shadow of the Holocaust, and it affects everything, including the study of texts that we're doing today. There is no part of definitely for us as a Jewish community, but but um, really, I would argue, and that's why it's a world holiday, that for the world, the whole world lives in the shadow of the Holocaust. So, with that being said, there's also something that happened in the news that, for those of you who follow what goes on in Israel, um, Israel has, um, as a nation, has paused yesterday and today to recognize the return of the last body, the last person back to Israel. And I say body because in this case, Ron Givley was returned back to his home as a corpse, as someone who was dead. But for Israelis, this is a very important demarcation in the war and in the last really over 10 years, because this is the first time since 2014 that an Israeli, living or dead, is not being held hostage or being kept by Hamas or Islamic Jihad as ransom, if you will. So psychologically, Israel, it's a sad day, obviously, because the man was returned dead, but it's also a sense of relief. And so when you see what's going on in Israel right now, for those of you who are following social media from people in Israel, the country is literally like in a period of both mourning and also kind of some of the tension of relief. And understand, by the way, too, that this was not returned to Israel without Israel having to go in. I don't know if some of you understand this, but Israel actually had to mount a rescue operation to bring the body home. I'm just going to show you 2 seconds of it so that you can understand um, what happened yesterday, because this was just released today. This is footage of the Israeli army going in to rescue and retrieve the body of Ron Givley. Now, why do I show that to you today? Well, because again, it affects all of us. But there's something else that I show you that so you understand is that um, Israeli Israelis risked their lives to bring home a body. You saw that. There were people that literally went in to the line of fire to bring home a body,
I never
meaning
saw that on the news ever.
meaning people could have been killed doing what they did. Nothing to me right now indicates the differences between what's going on in our country and what's going on in Israel. Because right now we have people that are being killed in our country, and the argument is over which side they're on, and it's tearing our country apart. I mean, this is not this is unbelievable what we're seeing right now, not because it's happening, but because what the reaction is from people in our country. And so when I see a country that's unified in the rescue of a person who nobody asked what their politics were, no one asked what they're feeling on Palestinian recognition of the states. No, it wasn't, there was no issue there. It was literally, we need to bring this person home, and we're going to do that. When this country treats the lives of our citizens the same at the same level, again, whatever the political situation, people are literally being torn apart by this. And the last time we felt that kind of unity in our country was after 9/11. And we need to get back to that in our country right now. And that's incumbent on both sides. That's incumbent. The reason why we're in the place we are, both sides are to blame. So whatever happened in the last couple of weeks is symptomatic of a much deeper problem. And nothing illustrates that difference better today than seeing the footage of that versus what we're watching on the news right now in our country. So again, when people want to understand consciousness and what it means to be in this moment right now, as a Jew, as an American, as someone who watches the media, I think almost anywhere, I think should pause today to think about that. And it's relevant to Genesis because Genesis, I will argue, is the origin story of humanity. That's why I called it this. Tried to come up with a name, and I spent a lot of time trying to think about what this name for this would be. Um, and I said, this is the human story. Now, we're going to talk in the course of these weeks. It's very appropriate, especially like in the next 2 weeks. We're going to talk about the agenda of the people who wrote the stories, because in some cases, like we're going to have today and next week, we're going to have two very different versions of a creation story. Nothing almost is more um, kind of indicative of like you know, you want a concrete example of authorship of the Bible and what's really going on when we talk about these kind of things. It's this week and next week. It's Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And we're going to get to this issue of like, why do you keep both stories? Why are both of these here? And how do we synthesize them? What do we take away from both? And so these are relevant issues. And again, over the course of the next couple of weeks, you're going to see this as we go through Genesis. But at the end of the day, this is first and foremost a Jewish story, and then becomes a story of humanity. But the agenda, and the lessons that are trying to be taught here are front and center. They're not hidden. There is an agenda to Genesis, and it was fine for the authors of these stories, and it's fine to recognize it. And as much as um, some of what we're going to discuss is maybe not the way they're going to talk about it in a yeshiva or an Orthodox setting, it is important for everybody, whatever their background, to at least consider some of these things. So our goal is not to blow up, or to demythologize, but it is to have people understand this, and to really appreciate the brilliance of of the authors of these books and what they were attempting to do. So you see in front of us Genesis, the 50 chapters of Genesis. Now, there are, as I said, about 50 stories in Genesis. They don't line up with the chapters. So the chapters that we have that you see here on Sepharia, which is where we're going to be reading from, is where we've been reading from for the last few years, a wonderful online resource for Jewish texts. This doesn't line up exactly, but it does sometimes. And so sometimes we're going to read over a chapter break, and sometimes we're just going to say, like we do today, we're reading Genesis chapter 1. And so the classes are going to be not the same length. They're not going to be exactly an hour and a half or 2 hours each time. Sometimes they might be an hour and 5 minutes. Sometimes they'll be about 90 minutes. I don't think they're ever going to go longer. The way we've been studying up until now, we read as much as we can during the 2 hours. We did on Tuesdays, and about an hour and a half when we were doing texts on Wednesdays. Wednesdays now, the Jewish journey classes, the Jewish the Jewish encyclopedia, if you will, the Wednesday night class, those are 90-minute classes around subjects. So that's a little different. These classes are text classes, but they're really around a unit, around a story. And some of the stories are going to be actually studied over a couple of weeks. When we get to Noah, which we're going to get to really soon, that's several chapters, and that's going to be studied over a couple of sessions. So it's not exactly necessarily always one session, one story, but we are going to be looking at these stories as units, and not just reading as long as we can during that allotted time, which is what we've been doing for a lot of it. So we're going to jump in to Genesis chapter 1, to Bereshit. And we started this at Simchat Torah on the Jewish calendar on our cycle of reading. We started this back a few months ago. So we're actually in the book of Exodus now. But when we started this at Simchat Torah, we read these words out, and we're going to take a look at it. And understanding from to some extent from the beginning here, that what we have here at the beginning is, well, I will say this. When we follow the story of how the Bible came together, the first words of the Bible, the first chapter of the Bible, is the creation, is the work of an author who is, like every author, like every person, has an agenda, but the agenda may not be the thing that you think it is. And as we go through chapter 1 today, and because I love science, especially cosmology, and I really love, you know, science fiction, especially kind of like speculative science fiction or science fiction that also tries to teach lessons. That's why I'm a Star Trek geek, and now I'm watching Star Trek, the Starfleet Academy, because um, you know, got to see what they're teaching the kids at Starfleet Academy. Um, it is very much the book of Genesis, and especially chapter 1, a look at um, the universe and a look at the world around us, but not, as we've said before, and as has been discussed, and is one of the issues that I have. Some people cannot get through Genesis chapter 1 without saying the Bible is myth, it's silly, it's not relevant because it's written by people who don't understand science or who don't understand um, that didn't have the information we have and are so backwards that there's nothing to be learned here. And so they literally close it at chapter 1. It's such a weird question, because as someone who loves science, I also love Genesis, and especially chapter 1, because the questions are completely different. Science asks the question, how did the universe happen? How did it mechanically? We want to know, how did it come into existence? And Genesis has a completely different starting question, which is why? Why is there a universe? Why is there something rather than nothing? And what's the significance of that? What does it mean? So let us take a look at the words Bereshit bara Elohim, and I'm gonna let Rosemary begin, and maybe we'll even have some different readers today because we have some other people who feel comfortable reading. And if you do feel comfortable reading, we're going to ask you maybe to chime in with a read here or there. But Rosemary, because you're our preeminent reader, will always be our preeminent reader. I'm going to give you the first day, the first step of creation.
When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day and called the darkness night. And there was evening and there was morning, a first day.
Beautiful. And that's why she's the preeminent reader. She brought that to life. And what I almost believe that Rosemary just made the universe come into existence. That's how good that was.
I got a chill reading it.
Yeah, it really is amazing. And it's amazing because, and people, of course, ask the question, how does this compare to other ancient myths of the creation of the universe? There are similarities. I mean, people have pointed out this is similar to one of the myths that existed in the ancient Near East, a work called Enuma Elish. But there is no work of the creation of the ancient world in any other tradition that begins like this. And the reason, of course, is that the author of our Bible has no other gods, has no other has no agenda to to um, to stake the power of one certain God. And almost, I mean, not almost, every other creation story we have essentially has an agenda of asserting the amazing brilliance, power, preeminence of the God of creation. Now, that's definitely here, but interestingly, you can see already, however early this is in our theology. So, whoever wrote this, we know something about their beliefs, which is that it was created by God, by one God, and what was created, which really also doesn't exist in any of these stories, is it wasn't stuff that was created first, it was time. Now, what's amazing, and again, take away from this what you will, that is what modern cosmology teaches us, right? That it wasn't matter that came into existence, but time and space. The Big Bang, we sometimes think of it like there's an explosion and that's everything. But that Big Bang is the beginning of time, it's the beginning of space. So when people who try to, and again, right now, the Big Bang theory is kind of our operating our operating system of how we fit pieces together of the information that we've collected so far. It's the organizing principle. It's the system that we use. Genesis essentially opens the same way, not with stuff. And almost every other myth that we have has stuff there that the gods are forming, they're working with. And of course, there is never this idea that what actually first started was time. It's an amazingly, at least from our standpoint, advanced understanding of it. Now, it could be because we don't have to make an argument over which God is the creator God. That's not part of it. But there's something brilliant about it, and there's something that is like revolutionary, and to some extent, it took thousands of years for humanity to catch up to it. So what's created first is time.
Rabbi,
And
I need you to explain that a little bit.
yeah,
I'm reading those lines. I'm reading those words. I need to a little deeper dive. How time?
so I will tell you this. You'll have to see, this is kind of weird, but you have to kind of see the way the rest of the days, you know, come out to understand that what's really happening here is the creation of time, because you've only seen the first day. So everyone focuses on the light being created, but the light, and the rabbis even understood this. Um, the light is not the sun, because we're going to read about the creation of the sun. The light is the origin of the moment that time started and allowed for there to be everything else. Again, you almost have to see the rest of the days being created. You have to see that the organizing principle of Genesis chapter 1 is each day, each step. And so you see that when you see the next day, and that's the organizing principle. Everything ends with, and that was the next day. But you see it in first of all, right? There's 5 lines in the first day is 5 lines. Now, you definitely have, and we're going to have this virtually on every day, is that judgment that God said it was good. God says Tov. So assent, God's approval, right, is mandatory for this to happen to some extent. It's baked into the system. Is God approving it? God doing it and then also approving it. Now it's funny because John and some of the people here were in our Kabbalah discussion Wednesday in the last few Wednesdays, talking about the Kabbalistic ideas of light and the vessels, and it goes back to this. It goes back to creation and the creation of light, and the fact that like in this moment there's an explosion, which is even more similar in some ways to the Big Bang. But Kabbalah is really talking about the creation of matter to some extent, the creation of like everything. Um, Whereas Genesis chapter 1 establishes that in order for there to be anything, there has to be a structure. And there are reasons why we, have called this author the priestly author, the P author. But the priestly author, if he's a priest, is concerned with sacred time. He's also concerned with sacred areas and sacred vessels and priests who are sacred and other people who aren't as sacred as the priests. But he is concerned with time. Also, because again, for priests, holidays, times that people pray are very important. So when we talk about agendas, there's an agenda here. Time and sacred time is an agenda. But because there is this moment when there's nothing and then there are things, time becomes part of the structure that allows everything to play out. And I'm going to use this analogy, even though you'll see it a little bit clearer as we come through the rest of the days. Time is one of the things that holds the universe together, if not the most important thing that holds the universe together, is time. And so for a priest, the way that those units of time are broken up are very important. The day, well, you do 3 sacrifices a day. Uh, the month, well, every month on Rosh Chodesh is another time. The sacred blocks of time for a priest are super important. People would also argue that the creation of time was the way, to some extent, the universe is ordered. We're still, I think, we still are very early as from the science standpoint, we're still very early in understanding time. Like I think, again, talking about time, 100 years from now, 500 years from now, we're going to have a very different understanding of time than we do today. We're starting to understand it. We're starting to come up with some theories about time and, whether time travel is possible, whether, does time exist differently, in different parts of the universe. These kinds of things there's still questions about it. But for the priests and to some extent, I read an interesting book a few years ago that tries to explain some of what we know about time. It's called From Eternity to Here. Get it? From eternity to here. And so it's really a study of time. And it's a pretty accessible. It's kind of one of those science books for people who are not, they're not studying science all the time. Um, but we still don't know a lot about time. But we need time and we need to figure out our own ways of sanctifying time. And even if we don't sanctify time and don't keep Shabbat or keep holidays, we need to find ways of marking time, which is why I said at the beginning, oh my gosh, it's January 27th already. We're already a month through the first month of the year. We just started this year, and now we're coming to the end of the first month. That month block, that year block, that anniversary, those units of time help us navigate our lives. If we don't have that, we can't function. To some extent, Genesis is saying God can't organize the universe unless we have time.
Okay, but then why didn't it say that? When God began to create heaven and
It
earth.
does. It does. The key line there is, and there was evening and there was a morning, a first day. You're going to see that as the refrain. That, again, I said, you'll see it more as you go through the rest of the creation. You don't see it as much with the first day because it's only 5 lines, and you'll see it as it builds. But the build up here in chapter 1 is time. I mean, look, the rest of the stuff fit into the boxes, fit into the system, but you've got to create the system. And this author is very concerned with the system. He's very concerned that the system works. And we'll get to that. I think you understand why. I mean, the system has to work, otherwise um you have chaos. And 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 to some extent, I'll say this too, which you might have seen already. When does creation really happen? Like, what is creation for us? It's when whatever happened before, however, like people ask all the time, like, I don't remember, like your child will, like, let's say you read this story to your child, like, you know, the kid might ask, well, what was there before that? Like, okay, they might ask that. So what, before God decided to create, what was then? What was that? That's an old question, by the way. That's a question that kids have been asking for thousands of years. You tell me your creation story, then I'm going to ask what happened before that. So what's interesting about this story is that it really almost lines up with science, or what we are trying to figure out about science. That question is a weird question because time didn't exist yet. So for us, and it says it right here, there was chaos. When what creation is the ability to distinguish to some extent that there is chaos. So the ability to say, well, this stuff isn't, I didn't know there was chaos, or I didn't know that this didn't exist. That's the moment of creation. Let there be light is when that happens the same time that the earth when we recognize the earth is unformed and void, what we call tohu vavohu, which is Hebrew and Yiddish for chaos. Tohu vavohu is a onomatopoeia. It's a word that is like, bleh, it's like craziness, like it's all crazy. So what we have before is not order. And by the way, this is kind of combining science on this, that in the first, billions of years of creation, you can't, you have to sound like Carl Sagan when you say billions, like, but when in that context, you say, yeah, for a long time there was unformed matter that seems to be there. So it's almost like, again, the rhythm and the way that we can distinguish patterns is God starting to create. So again, we're going to see that the this will make more sense as we go through the different days, and you see that the differentiation, the separations, the demarcations are the way creation is made. But the first one is, again, from chaos and saying, oh, well, there is chaos, but we're gonna start to make sense of that chaos.
Chaos, there was nothing. How
Well,
could chaos is assuming that there's
it's
some
this.
type of beings on some rock somewhere.
So this is the, if you will, this is the conceit that I don't think the authors could put into words. The earth being unformed and void, whatever exists at this point seems to be already what you'd have from the Big Bang, if you will. But
So there
so
there were no creatures, John. There
That's
was
right. So how can there be
just
chaos?
stuff.
How can there be chaos
The chaos of matter, the chaos of
yeah,
wind, the
of
chaos
particles?
of
Well,
if you will, these two things are brought together. The chaos of creation, or of the first matter, and the moment before that, which was, what was it before? And again, with all due respect, the author is not concerned with that. As I said, he's not concerned with the mechanics of it. My point is, it's interesting how it lines up better with science than most people give it credit for. Because again, people will look at this and go, "This is stupid. This isn't the way creation happened." And what I'm saying is, well, first of all, that's not even the question. But the second thing is it really that different? Is it really not saying that the first thing that kind of came into existence was that moment that time came into existence? And again, like I said, you'll see the time order as we go through this, because that's the organizational principle of this. Like, some people will focus on what was created. That's true. That's important, but that's not the focus. The focus is of time.
But
But let's look.
but I think before you go on,
Yeah.
I think that by when people say it's stupid, having been one of them, you can't believe that. I think we do them, and I think we do the Torah, Genesis, a disservice by trying to conflate them. They are they
Yeah,
have
they're different. They're different. They're a
they're
different question.
so different. They're such different questions that when people get snarky and smug and say, I believe in science, this is useless or this is silly, I think the message shouldn't be, wait, we can fit it, but what's the other? I think that's
Yeah, you're right, but I think one of the things that I think, I guess for me, if the stories were so ridiculously at odds, I'd have a problem with it, in the sense that I would say, well, this is kind of a fairy tale. And what I think is interesting is that our ancestors, and again, when people ask me, like, what is the Bible to begin with, I will say it's our ancestors' attempt at trying to understand the world and God, and why we're here, right? So I think that this is part of that. And to some extent, like, you don't want them to be completely off the mark. So there is this feeling like, you look at your ancestors and you want them to say, yeah, I didn't expect them to understand this, but I also, like, if they're completely insane, we have to call them out on that. And we talked about it. There's stuff that's going on here that's insane, and we call it out, and they called it out. I mean, for the most part, thankfully, when it came to child sacrifice that we talked about last week, was still going on in the 600s, 600 BCE. That's still going on 600 years, 700 years after the stories we're going to read in Genesis. Abraham's story, we talked about it, right? They're still doing it long after Abraham. Um, they called it out. So I'm okay with them being wrong about stuff, but I also do take some comfort. I'll be honest. I take comfort in pride in the fact that they didn't create a story that I'm laughing at, because I'm like, that's such a stupid story. That's turtles on top of other turtles. And, like, again, it's not that that's a stupid story. Like, that's a cult. Now I've just made a cultural judgment. But I will say this. It's great that our mythology, if you will, lines up pretty well with science. I mean, that's my bias, and I'll admit it. It's my bias.
your bias because I look at that and it makes me believe it less.
Yeah,
You know
I'm
what I
not.
mean? Like it cheapens it.
I hear you. I look at the totality of it and say, look, this is they're trying to figure it out. They're trying to figure out, and by the way, I also have that kind of science fiction thread to me, which is, I hope my descendants have as much compassion on me as I had on my ancestors. You know what I mean? I hope they look at me and go, they were so stupid. And like, I'm like, I didn't know. That's all I knew. So I hope that yeah, our descendants have the same rachmanis, as we say in Yiddish, right, on us as I will on my ancestors, and saying, yeah, well, they didn't have a telescope.
Well,
They
so building on that, if you take the first three lines and go down to three, right? And assuming at that point there had to have been somebody, something, it says God said, okay, well, Adam and Eve weren't here yet. So how is that, you know, I have to understand
No,
how
no, no,
this
no.
author
Finish. No,
are
finish
they
your saying.
are
So
they
finish your finish your saying.
is the author implying that somebody was there, something or someone was there to receive that message, let there be light, and there was light?
Okay, so that's a great question, right? That's another great. Who's God talking to, right? So first of all, there are slight differences in the usage of the word vayomer and vayidaber. Vayidaber is a conversation. When we see the word vayidaber, it's like people are speaking to somebody else, right? Somebody spoke to somebody, and this is what they said. And the conversation comes. Vayomer almost is God said, and we have a Vayomer Elohim a lot of times. Vayomer Adonai, we have it a lot. God says. But oftentimes it's God saying it from the standpoint of almost thinking it, right? Vayomer could almost be, and God willed it, right? Um, it's less of who's on the other end hearing it. So Vayomer sometimes has an implication of thought or you know simply um, willing something or thinking of it. So that this is one of the reasons why this is a little is you know it's oh, I want to say Mandy too. Mandy's the creation story is not created in a cultural void, right? I think it's important too, again, that we understand that people in those times were trying to find um, they only understood again in reaction to the people around them and or telling stories the way they want to, they can. And again, to some extent, I would say here's a good example of it when God says something, it is like we're asking the question, who's God speaking to? Whereas they might not have been asking that question because and not just our God, but when a God says something, and you understand this, is that God wills creation into existence. Now, there is an important question here too, which is does God, and this is something that's in Kabbalah, it's also in non-Kabbalah, not for you don't have to go to Kabbalah for this, that God's words have the power to create. God creates through speaking, which is not something that we do generally. We have a lot of power with our words, but we don't bring things into existence. Um, God does. And that's one of the things that makes God God is that God speaks things into creation. And it's I guess, the takeaway, of course, is that do we create things by our speech too? I mean, do we a little bit? So there is this kind of like maybe we do as well, but God definitely does. And so there's an interesting teaching that we take away from this. So thank you again. This is exactly why we want to have these discussions. Um, Judaism
And
teaches.
I'm not trying to discredit it.
No, no, no. I
What
know.
Mandy
No,
said.
this is a no.
I'm trying to
You're
understand it
yeah,
more.
yeah,
Otherwise,
John.
it wouldn't be 50 chapters. It could be 1,000
Exactly,
chapters.
exactly. So, John, you got to a point that I wasn't going to necessarily, I hadn't thought of to bring to, and it's an important, very important one, which is that Judaism and the Torah, and right from the beginning, from the third word, the third line, Judaism teaches the power of words, right? And so the Torah has power because it's words, right? And so when we speak the words of Torah, we create realities and and so words are very important for us. And it goes back to this. It goes back to creation. It goes back to speaking things. Now, sometimes it's because of who we're speaking it to, who's on the receiving end. But sometimes it's just speaking it. Sometimes even for us, we are people go, hey, you talk to yourself. I talk to myself a lot. My kids know that. but I do it because I have thoughts that that and again, people are like, did that dude just say he talks to himself all the time? No, but sometimes you actually have to say the words. Sometimes, again, thinking it is important, but sometimes saying the words out help you formulate your ideas and what you're going to say, right? Sometimes you need to run a conversation through out loud, even, not just in your head, but hear the words come out of your mouth. And so Judaism teaches us that yeah, there's a huge power in words, both in the written word, but also in speaking something. So who's on the other end? Very important. But sometimes it's whether we hear it. And in this case, again, God has that power to bring things into existence simply by speaking. God, of course, also calls the things, names the things, right? So God called the light day. So God is helping to organize things also by naming them, which is part of that idea of assigning names and words, semantics, if you will. Very important in Judaism. What we're going to call this, what are we going to agree is what we're going to call it. Very important. So, as you can see, we've done one day. Now, again, this will set the tone for the other days, but this is why this is important to not rush through anything, but especially creation. Anybody else? Sorry, I don't even want to rush out of the first day. So let's look at day two.
God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, that it may separate water from water." God made the expanse, and it separated the water that was below the expanse from the water that was above the expanse. And it was so. God called the expanse sky, and there was evening and there was morning, a second day.
So here you see the second day is now happened. I'm doing the end first and then going back. We'll go back to it. What you see here, though, back to the original point that John made, what you see here is time. Because what's the demarcation now? You see you can see it now on the second day, which is that there's an evening and there was a morning, a day. So every day of creation is going to be marked, not necessarily, again, the things that are created are important, but what is created was time in the first day, which allows everything else to then be created by having a place for it, a holder, if you will. It's the day, it's the time. So time is part of what allows everything else to come into existence is by having a way of organizing these things, putting chaos and putting matter and putting then the objects into their proper place. And the proper place, one of those things is time. Um, so this is the creation, and this is where people start to say, well, this really isn't scientific because we have the separation of waters. Now, this really does seem to be talking about the fact that there seems to be an earth, and the earth is where this is happening because there doesn't seem to be this separation of waters in the entire universe. Though there are people who try to find that. This is where, to Judith's point, people stumble over themselves to try to line this up with science. Um, I think it's really on the first day where you have that amazing line with the Big Bang. Again, we might learn other things in the future where we'll look at the first day and go, nah, that's not what we know about the beginning of time and the beginning of matter. But for now, we don't have any other information that would make that far, different. This is because this is to the point. This looks like people are standing on Earth and seeing the separation of the sky to the waters below. And what we would call this is the horizon line. right? This is the horizon line. This is the separation between um, this is the separation between the blue sky where the waters are when it rains and the lower waters where where the where the rivers are, the lakes, all the wonderful things that we'll get to that are living in those things. But we have a separation of waters. And this rakia that it's called the rakia. It's sometimes called the firmament, which is the King James translation, is the expanse. The firmament is the separator, is the line that separates those. There's a there's a wall, very thin wall between those things. I mean, today you could say that's kind of like the atmospheres, right? The different levels of the atmosphere. Um, but they saw it as literally like a we're sitting in a globe, in a snow globe, and there's a very thin piece of glass that separates everything inside the snow globe from the stuff that's above it. And they were like, but it's both blue. They're blue, and they both have water. And so they saw those separations as being very important because that allows for life to exist, that separation. Otherwise, it's all going to be water. There's going to be water everywhere. So there has to be an area where there's no water. And that's what the rakia is. It's the separation of those waters. They looked at it, they looked at the world around them, and they saw that seems to make sense because we see in the observable world there's water up there and there's water down here. So they must be separated. So what's interesting about this is that this is especially important for our next stories. Not so much the Cain and Abel stories that are coming up, but the Noah story. Because in the Noah story, these waters are no longer separated. There's chaos in the waters. And very close readers of the Bible have noticed, and our rabbis were very close readers of the Bible, that when the second day of creation happens, God never says it was good. God never says tov. And so the rabbis say that's because God knows that if things ever get out of whack, I'm going to undo this. So let's not call it good because good gives it a sense of permanence, a sense of, yeah, this is the way it's going to be. And so there is no judgment of good here. It doesn't say good. Every other day of creation, it says at least tov. I'm going to say at least tov.
Is that connected to the story of Noah and the flood?
Yeah, that's what I was just saying.
Oh,
This is
sorry.
that's okay. This is the Noah story, allowing for the Noah story to happen embedded in God's creation. God gave this out so that it's not good because I'm going to pull this apart. I'm going to pull the rakia out for a moment. So this is the creation of the separation of waters. But it's very important for what happens now, which is the creation of earth and life. So immediately we have this kind of in the first day of creation, almost a universal creation. But here it seems very clear that this is about what's going on planet Earth. Okay, so that's where I will say to Judith, yes, let's not make this all. Our ancestors were so brilliant that they forecasted that. Now they did, though, my dear Judith, they did know that there were steps towards the evolution of life, and they weren't 100% wrong about that, which is that in order for you to have life, you had to have water. They did seem to understand that was a pretty important part of creation, and that then you're going to have dry land, and then you're going to have everything else you'll see, which kind of overall pretty true, at least from science. When I say true, from what we know. All right, so here's now day number 3.
God said, "Let the water below the sky be gathered into one area, that the dry land may appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and called the gathering of waters seas. And God saw that this was good. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, seed-bearing plants, fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants of every kind, and trees of every kind, bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that this was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a third day.
So you have the separation of waters, which now allows for the separation of dry land, which then, of course, there's two things that are going to happen on day three, which is you're going to have the separation of dry land, the earth coming together in certain places, and then you have vegetation sprouting on it. So there's really two things that are there, and that's why you have two times. And God saw that this was good. And God saw that this was good. So after God creates the earth, right, Eretz, and um, you have vegetation, God again says, this was good. So here you also see a little bit, our priest. Our priest gives away certain things that he does. He does certain things.
Such as,
Our priestly author loves certain phrases. He loves um, this phrase, for example, pre let me know, or let me nehu, according to their kind. The priestly author loves making distinctions. He loves telling you what's kosher and what's not kosher, what's okay and what's not okay, what's tameh and tahor, what's sacred and what's profane. And the word leminehu, it doesn't simply just say seed bearing fruit, vegetation. It says according to their kind. And the priestly author is very concerned with that. And by the way, the priestly author's concern with those separations and those distinctions and those categorizations are a big part of his agenda. And it goes back, and again, you start to see it right here at the beginning, because it doesn't just say he brought forth vegetation, but according to their kind. You'll see it in the Noah story. When you see that guy go on a little, it it kind of goes off on the animals according to their kind. Uh, it's not enough for him just to say God created plants. The other author, Jay, does not have an issue of throwing out according to their species or according to their, but again, it's one of the reasons why when we get to the priestly author and people have an issue with this, I'm going to tell you, you'll see it right away. When those demarcations fall away, the priestly author won't have it, right? So when you get to Leviticus and you see a guy telling you, don't, if you're a man, don't dress as a woman, this is a guy, and a guy, it's not a woman, it's a priest, who is very concerned that um, people don't destroy those boundaries. He's very into boundaries. And if you're a priest, it makes sense. Got to have boundaries. Not everybody can be a priest. Not everyone can go into the sacred areas. So he's very concerned with that. And so when I see those words, I'm like, I want to point them out to you occasionally, going, yeah, here's our priest. He can't simply just say it. And it's just like in some cases, it's just so obvious, right? Seed bearing plants of every kind, but it's, leminehu. It's again, it's of according to their kind and every kind. So it's very important for these things to have their place, for the seeds. Well, we know where those are. Now, of course, this is really important for this to be regenerative, that these things will grow and have seeds, and then they can grow some more. This is, by the way, not also, this is significant. It's not a throwaway line, that these are things that can regenerate. not everything that we plant is regenerative. For example, grain. You need to cultivate grain. If you cut down wheat, when it's done, it ain't coming back unless you plant the seeds again. You have to plant it. You have a tree, it has fruit. That's going to keep growing.
But
And
the,
if the
the
seeds
grain,
fall,
but grain
and
wasn't discussed here.
no, no, it wasn't discussed here. That's critical. It's
You know,
critical.
you know the way I see it, Rabbi?
Yep.
I see 11 and 12 very, very, very important, right? Obviously every line's important, but to me it's so God, he's let the earth sprout vegetation, seed bearing, blah, 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 and it was so. So it's like he took matter and made something perfect, right? Of every kind on earth, right? And then the second sentence says that every kind was made. So I don't know. That's how I see it. It's like this.
No, no,
Here's
it is. It is super important that you recognize that God created all these things and make them, and there's a place for them. Got to have dry land in order to have that. But I'm only pointing that out to you because there is an important idea that exists in the Bible, which is that we take for granted the fact that, we live thousands of years after the agricultural revolution. But the agricultural revolution shifted human society, organized it in such a way that made things that people didn't have before they had an agricultural revolution. They didn't have kings, they didn't have cities. And so there is an agenda that we'll see in the Bible, and we're going to see it right away, that planting wheat and creating societies based around that, there's a challenge to that, and not everyone dug that. And the last peoples, especially the nomadic people, which were our ancestors, when you're nomadic, you don't care about wheat. I mean, everyone loves to have a nice roll, right? So it's not like they didn't eat it. But if you're the person who's growing that wheat, you're not you're not making friends with the nomads and vice versa. You're competing for resources and you don't need somebody's city wall. You can't, they're going to come out and tell you you're on our property now. So those issues are definitely in the book of Genesis and they're in the Bible. They're throughout the Bible. And originally our society was a nomadic society. And to some extent, the Canaanites and the other peoples that we, come up in conflict with, and eventually we become, agricultural folks as well. But that change exists in the Bible. And there's definitely within the Bible some a little pushback on that. And when you look at our heroes, right, which we're going to see in Genesis, right? We're going to see Abraham, we're going to see Jacob, we're going to see those guys in Genesis. They're nomads, right? They're nomads. They're not living in cities. And guess what? Even when people are living in cities, our heroes are nomads. They're Moses, they're David, they're people who are out with the sheep. So there's this understanding, there's a bias in our text, especially again in these sections that we're going to be reading, um, that people do not dig each other on the two sides here. So the way God, again, I don't want to make too much of it, but I do want to bring your attention to it. The way that God may have intended things, at least according to the priestly author, is for there to be vegetation that regenerates, not stuff that you need to plant in order for it to exist. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out throughout the rest of human history. But yeah, day three is what dry land and vegetation, as we see. Yeah,
one last thing, Rabbi. You
yeah,
you see 11 and 12. You see how the author states, and it was so, right? So God saying, okay,
mhm,
this is it. This is what I'm
yep,
making. And then the last sentence in 12, and God saw that this was good. Almost like he he hadn't done this before, or he had, and he's kind of patting himself on the back. The author is kind of giving him that
yes,
credit.
yes.
I
And
don't
this
know.
is
That's
no, no, that's an important part. And this was good that we said. And it doesn't happen in day two. It's the only day that we don't have that, which allows for the rabbis and other people. And I think it's legitimate that when God unplugs the firmament or takes out the firmament for a moment, washes it out, if you will. Um, it allows for it because he didn't say it was good. He didn't create that permanence. He didn't create that blessing on it, which is, and this is the way it's going to be from now on. And if God says it's good, we got to assume that's for all time, right? God gives it a judgment, and that's a universal, eternal judgment. And this was good. This is ketov. This is the way it's supposed to be. And again, if you want, makes sense that a priest is going to say that. This is good. This is kosher. It's kosher, right? So let's look at the day four, which is again from the standpoint of being on the earth.
God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate day from night. They shall serve as signs for the set times, the days and the years, and they shall serve as lights in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth." And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to dominate the day, and the lesser light to dominate the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth, to dominate the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that this was good.
Yeah. Now this is
Again,
where people sometimes go, and I'll say it right away. Yeah, this isn't what science tells us. What are you talking about? This is creation of things in the sky that were there before there was Earth. So why are you telling us that there were planets and that there were stars that are created on day four, on the fourth step of creation? But again, there's a point to it, which is it's not to explain science, it's to explain that. And if you want any more obvious explanation for the way creation lays it out, what is the purpose of the stars? What's the purpose of the lights? It's to serve as set times. It's to understand time. So there's a parallel between day one and day four, which is in day one, you have time. In day four, you have the ways that we tell time. There's a very important thing here I'm setting up for you, which is that maybe that's really the structure of Genesis. That's what most people say today. That you have creation of time, and then in day four, you have three things, three steps three steps of creation of the boxes, if you will. And then you have in days four, five, and six, the things that fill those boxes. So it helps you understand how the days are lined up. Again, this isn't my theory. This is pretty much accepted biblical scholarship on why creation is the way it is. Like, so if you take a college class and they teach Genesis chapter one, this is what they'll tell you. Yes, John, you were going to say something.
well, it makes sense a bit more to me. The sun and the moon and such are not gods, right? They're clocks, right? That's coming into the bigger picture for
Well,
my
that's a huge
small
issue.
brain.
What you just said is huge because in the ancient world, those were gods. And the Bible just laid out, the priestly author just said to people in his own community too, who is, we know, because we read Kings and we read Chronicles, these people are still worshiping the stars as gods. He literally just said, those are things to mark time by. Those are not gods, those are your clocks. 100% right. That's a huge theological statement, though. It's a huge theological statement for people to just be told, yeah, those things that you're worshiping, those are timepieces. You're worshiping a watch. And that's I think brilliant. I mean, again, when we want to start being prideful of what our ancestors knew, they understood that. Now, again, they didn't care so much that those things are older than our planet, for example. They're not concerned with that, and that's not really their agenda.
They
But
didn't
yes,
know.
they made a huge theological statement there, which is that you people that are worshiping the queen of the heavens or the whatever star that was, whether it was Venus or whatever, people think it was, no, you're worshiping you're worshiping things that God put up there to help us. And again, they're beautiful. It doesn't say they're not, they're there to take their place in it. And again, it took thousands of years for people to stop worshiping the stars. And there's still people who do.
Well,
but
this reminds me of Gulliver's Travels, where the Lilliputians think that Gulliver's watch is his god because he says he never does anything without consulting it. And I think we could probably update that to phones.
yeah,
That's a
that's a
good
good point.
point.
That's the
Very
Gulliver.
good point.
Yeah, Swift was way in advance on that. It would become worse. But yeah, but this is a huge theological statement that made Judaism different from all these other traditions, which was no, these are timepieces, and that's their point, is God puts them there for to help us. Again, not very scientific. As a matter of fact, maybe one could argue the least scientific part of Genesis of is day four, because it doesn't follow it doesn't follow the steps of evolutionary creation that we would say, first the planet, and then there's dry land, and there's water and dry land, and then vegetation, and then because that's all what we're going to have. But it's because, again, this creation story is filling up day one with day four matches with day one, and then we're going to see this is also what happens. Yeah, kind of giving it away with the days that come after. But let's look at those. So that's the fourth day, and you can again see. All right, John, do you want to read day five? God said.
God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures and birds that fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky." God created the great sea monsters and all the living creatures of every kind that creep, which the waters brought forth in swarms, and all the winged birds of every kind. And God saw that this was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fertile and increase, fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, a fifth day.
Excellent. Again, we see the priestly author at work, right? All the things according to their kind, right? Every creature according to their kind. Species are with species. There's an order to it. Oh, look at and again, there's it's a wonderful kind of variety of creation, but this author is not concerned with necessarily just acknowledging the variety, but that each one has their place. Like we call that one a falcon, and we call that one a chicken, and so these birds all have their place, and they all have their name, and they're all, let's keep them separate. Some of them we can eat, some of them we can't eat. All of that is implied by according to their kind. And
Why
again,
mon- why
good.
monsters though? Why monsters?
Well, that's an interesting understanding of what was going on in the waters, right? What's going on in in um in creation. So again, day five is the filling of, so just like we filled time, we're now filling the heavens and the waters, which were created on day two, right? That day two is the separation of the heavens and the waters. And now we have the heavens and the waters being filled with things, life. So birds in the sky and the things in the water. So that's what happened just now, right? So day four is time, filling that box. And then day five, two things, heaven and earth, which were day two. So you see how day one goes with day four, day two goes with day five. And you can imagine day three goes with day six. It does. Um, but what's interesting about the things going on in the waters is that the words that they use here, the tninim, the 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 sea monsters or the great beasts, um, we understand we understand that this is something that was very important for our ancestors. This idea of there being things in the waters that are huge, that are scary, and in ancient mythology, or actually the things that in some cases in the ancient Near East, God killed those things and then created the world out of those creatures. You don't have that here. That's the normal kind of Babylonian mythology, that God, the gods defeated sea monsters and created land out of them. Um, but there is this kind of understanding there's stuff in the water that we don't understand. Like, we don't know what's going on there. There's things down there that are huge. Now, most of our ancestors, the furthest, they didn't get past the Mediterranean. Maybe some of them went down to the Red Sea and saw a little bit more, of the waters. But our ancestors were not water people. For the most part, they lived in landlocked areas of Judea. And for them, some of them maybe never even got to the beach. Honestly, they lived their entire lives without ever going to the waters. It's hard to believe, but it's very possible because they really did live on those areas. And the coastal areas were at this time were probably controlled more by Philistines and Canaanites. So they may not have gone. It wasn't worth it.
So instead of creatures, sailors that made their way, and the author who spoke to them said, "Wow, I can't believe something would be so big." I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose
And what the
that's reasonable.
Bible is saying is that all of it was created by God. Even those great sea monsters, even those things that these other people think are like rivals of God's, these are nothing. And that's
Uh,
what we read. That's what we read about in Job, where Job says, when God says to Job after he questions him, God says to him, "Were you there when I made the Leviathan? Were you there when I made that great sea monster?" Leviathan is the most famous of the sea monsters, but he says, "Were you there when I made that?" And I play with that. The Leviathan is like a plaything to me. It's a toy. So, Genesis from the beginning is establishing that, like, anything you can think of, even those things that like we don't really understand in the waters, God created those. And so, some people say, well, what about dinosaurs? And like, the Bible is not concerned with dinosaurs. It's not concerned with how animals developed over time. They're concerned about where those animals live. And the animals that live in the sky, those are observable. The animals that live on the land are observable. Sometimes they hide, but we're eventually going to catch them. We might even eat them, but we're not going to ever understand everything that's going on in the water. And we're still discovering amazing things underwater. Like, we continue to discover new species underwater. And in some cases, some of them are fairly large. And we're like, we didn't even know that existed. So we're still learning about the waters. And I think that that's also, if you want, an interesting similarity between kind of ourselves and our ancestors, in the sense that we're both looking at the waters and going, "Oh my gosh, like, can you imagine what's down there?" And it's also like, I mean, you go out on your boat, you're worried about it. Like, it's like, what is out there that, and it's not even just obviously a sea monster, but what's out there in the weather. And we have amazing technology now that helps us with that. But you can imagine that, like, this is kind of an understanding that, like, it's all God's stuff. Now, God also gives the living creatures this command: "Pru or vu," be fruitful and multiply, right? And so this is important because the land animals will get this same command: be fertile and increase, fill. So there's this understanding that, like, that's the place for these things. They live there, and God wanted them to live there, and God wanted them to increase. God wants there to be life in those places. That's the way it's meant to be. And also, by the way, an important lesson for us, which is that, like, the animals are supposed to be there. This is not this isn't like an accident, and we know it. I mean, we unfortunately forget it a lot, but the animals are there as God's creatures too. Like, God wants them there. And that taught the rabbis, for example, who say in their reading of Genesis, look, you and I look at some of these things and go, why did God create this? Why did God create a scorpion? Why did and the rabbi said, well, God wanted it there. So we have to essentially keep it. And look, we've learned this lesson the hard way. There was a point in time in our history not too long ago where we said, mosquitoes, we don't want them anymore. Let's just eradicate all the mosquitoes. And then we realized, and I'm saying this because my grandfather helped develop DDT for the government in the 20s and 30s, whatever, back in the day. He was working on these wonderful types of pesticides. We realized that we were destroying other animals in the process who fed on those animals. And it was part of a cycle that we couldn't just pull something out. So look, we've gotten clever. We've tried to do away with the malaria instead of doing away with the mosquitoes. But yeah, the rabbi said we don't like these things, but they have a place. God wanted them there. And when it says that God created those things, they're part of God's creation. They couldn't articulate exactly why, but they knew that there's a reason for it. They're here because they fit some place in that cycle. It's amazing. So the fifth day is the creation of life in the skies and in the waters, which mirrors day two. And now, of course, we get to the mirror of day three, which is the land creatures.
You want me to read?
Yep.
God said, "Let the earth bring forth every kind of living creature, cattle, creeping things, and wild beasts of every kind." And it was so. God made wild beasts of every kind, and cattle of every kind, and all kinds of creeping things on the earth. And God saw that this was good. And God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth." And God created humankind in the divine image, creating it in the image of God, creating them male and female. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth." God said, "See, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit. They shall be yours for food." And cattle. Sorry, that's me.
No, that's very important. It's not there.
"And to all the animals on land, to all the birds of the sky, and to everything that creeps on earth, in which there is the breath of life, I give all the green plants for food." And it was so. And God saw all that had been made and found it very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day.
So you can see what's created on the sixth day, which is life on land, which again, we're the last to the show, right? We are uh, the final piece of God's creation. God saw that was good after creating the animals, and then humankind, right? And of course, when God creates humans at the end, it was very good, right? Tov me'od. That's the only thing that God says tov me'od to.
Mm.
Very good. God says very good. So God says good to everything except for day two, and then very good for day six. Now that's obviously important. I mean, the rabbis noticed that. They also were perplexed by it because they looked at God's creation and they looked at themselves and they said, "Are we really the pinnacle of God's creation? Are we really the best?" And there was this understanding that, yeah, we're kind of messed up. Like we do weird things, we do bad things. We sometimes really screw up. And what's interesting is the rabbi said, no, there must be a reason why God created us and created us with all of our imperfections. And so God saying Tov Ma'od means that God wants us to have like all of the imperfections that we have. And even as they said, the Yetzer Hara, when God sees who we are with the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara, God says, yeah, that's the way it is. And it's good. And so there was this understanding that, yeah, God must want us this way. It doesn't mean that God wants us to do bad things. On the contrary, God wants us to be in the image of God. But Tselem Elohim, that's what it says we are. It says we're in the image of God. We're the only things that are created B'Tselem Elohim. We're the only thing that are created in the divine image. And that's a critical idea. I mean, we could just spend an hour talking about these few verses of the creation of human beings. Again, the creation of these things also are according to their kind, right? Every kind, let me not. The priest is going to do his thing, and the priest is going to tell you, hey, male and female, that's the way God wants it. And they're both good, and they're both in the image of God, by the way. And again, the image of God being something that could be replicated both male and female means that God is not male or female. God must have both essences. Otherwise, God couldn't create them both in the image of God. Now, again, this is different than the next creation story. And when we read creation 2, we're going to have to talk about that, right? And we're going to do that next week. We're going to look at creation 2 next week. Um, but you can see both of these are in the same Torah portion. So if we studied this as one Torah portion, we would have to be here literally all day talking about just these first two chapters, just these two creation stories, because there's so much here. And again, the priest, the priest would not want to be involved in our discussions of gender identity, gender fluidity. This priest is not interested in that. The priest says there's male and female, and that's it. Male and female. Now, the Talmud says that there's 6 different genders, and there is some fluidity and there is some nuance to it. The Torah, it does not have that. It's 2 categories. Again, Talmud has 6. Um, and there's an understanding that like maybe that's the way God breaks things down, but there's variations to that. There's a spectrum, if you will, to that. But yeah, for the most part, the priest is black or white, male or female, day or night. And these are distinctions. And these are some of the distinctions that God creates. Now, human beings are also told, be pruervu, be fruitful and multiply, or be fertile and increase. So interestingly, some people say that's a command that human beings get. And I would say, not really, because God did bless them and say to them, right? But he says to them in the same way that he speaks to everything, Vayomer. It's not like he called the man over and said, hey, be fruitful and multiply, because he said it to the animals too. God articulated, God willed it. And if we're doing the same thing the animals are doing, is that really a commandment? You can't, your dog or your cat doesn't fulfill mitzvot. Your dog and cat does things that are instinctually part of what they do. So it's not a mitzvah.
Whoa, 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 wait, 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 wait. Or God baked it into them, into
Yes,
their
they're
DNA.
instinct. They would call them instincts.
I understand that, but it's not just instinct. Instinct would be something different.
Why?
Because
It's baked into you.
I think
It's
of it.
what it, it's
I
what
know, I get it. I
it's
know, I
what you're
know.
going to do, right? My
Yeah.
point is this: there are people who get charged on this because they say God told us to be fruitful and multiply, be fertile and increase. Okay, fine. There's
We're
people who
trying.
can't. There's people who can't have children. So is somebody who can't have a child not fulfilling a mitzvah? And I would say, no, it's not a mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah any more than your dog. You gave a mitzvah to your dog
It's
to, or
beyond
your
their
cat.
control. It's beyond their
Correct.
it's beyond but for.
Yes. And so one would say that maybe we shouldn't treat pro, procreation as a mitzvah. Maybe we should see it as that's what we do. That's our instinct. That's our natural default. Don't have to. And we are also not broken if we don't have kids. So let's remind people, let's remind ourselves of that occasionally, because again, we don't want to send a message to people that something's defective about you if you don't have children. Sometimes it's a choice, sometimes it's not a choice. And again, we can sometimes not be, you know, very nice about it. And so when people go, but it's in the Bible, I'm like, yeah, but the animals are told to be fertile. It's the same words. It's not even like a variation of it. It says pru or vu. So if God speaks to animals and tells them to be fertile and increase, okay, yeah. So people can be fertile and increase, maybe, but it's the way, it's the default. It's like your natural instinct. And And it's what a lot of people do, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong if you don't do it. And that's what I'm trying to say. Is like, let's keep it in mind. And that's going to be an important issue as we go through Genesis. Is, are there really, what are the commandments? And for the most part, Genesis is not about commandments. It's about the way things are. It's a statement of where things are. And to some extent, like as you see right here at the beginning, this is the way God created it. It's an explanation for the way things are. It's a justification in some cases for the way things are. But it doesn't mean it's the last word. And it doesn't mean that if something doesn't go according to plans, it's wrong. And that's a really important idea as we get into Genesis, because we're going to see a common theme in Genesis is women who can't have children. So if women can't have children, it can't, then like, are they defective? Well, look, I mean, the Bible definitely says it causes them pain that they can't, but clearly God creates people that can't have kids. So I do want to say, like, we got to be careful when people run around telling everybody, well, the Bible says you're supposed to have children. And if you don't have children, then if you're in a relationship that you can't have kids, that's not what the Bible wants. I said, well, the Bible is a little bit more nuanced than that, and that's not the point. The point is, yeah, people generally default to that, but that's not the way it has to be. And it's not you're defective if you're not. So again, human beings are created and given the ability, John, to eat plants, and specifically plants that have seeds and plants that will regenerate. They're for you to have food. I give you all the animals. I give them all to you, but they are um, they are part of your responsibility. You master them, you're in charge of them, but you're not given permission to eat them. So there's an understanding in the
God
Bible,
was vegan?
not God,
I mean,
human
God wanted
beings.
people to be vegan. Sorry.
Yeah, not only vegan, but I would say specifically like regenerative plants. Like God wants people to be like Jains, like the Indian religion that doesn't allow for people to kill anything in order to get food. So you can have a piece of fruit that comes off the tree, but you can't cut down the tree, and you can't cut down stuff necessarily to even have that food. So yeah, it's very, very interesting that the world that God creates here at the beginning is one that's regenerative and one that doesn't require human beings to do much else other than tend to the planet the way God left it, which means you don't have to plant, fields of you know, plant of barley or wheat or any of these other grains in order to live. If you have the stuff that God gave you, you'd be just fine with it. So it's a little bit um it's a little bit Judith just asked about the protein drink in pluribus. I wasn't going to say James. I was going to say what human beings become in pluribus, but yes, in pluribus they don't want to kill anything. So yes, it creates a an interesting situation. Though as we explore other planets, and as you've seen from other science fiction like The Martian and any other thing that's talked about how we're going to have to go into explore other planets, we're going to have to create regenerative types of systems in order to take people to other planets. We're not going to be able just to plant stuff for no purpose, that every single part of our existence, including our waste, is going to have to go back into um, thinking about Matt Damon growing those potatoes on Mars. You're gonna have to create a system to help the system not be taxed by unnecessary stuff. So this is a system that allows for continuation for life to exist without to some extent without chaos. So we're gonna read the last point. And again, I feel like I'm rushing. It's because we're pretty close. I thought we'd be about 90 minutes on this, but it's been a great discussion. And again, to get back to one of the things that we say, we look at it with pride. Yeah, according to Genesis chapter 1, we come late to the party, which
You know,
is
Rabbi, oh, go
which
ahead.
is
Sorry.
exactly what science is also taught us. We arrive very late when people try to tell you how late we are, in Earth history or in the history of the universe. Like they say, human beings were created on the last hour of the last, they were created in the last hour on the timeline. If and it's really it's mind blowing when you think about how new we are, and that God has created an ordered system of what we are, not just essentially the crown of creation, which we are, I think. I mean, I like that. Makes us feel pretty special, but we're also its caretakers. We're also left with the reality that we have to be in charge and be responsible. Like we are responsible for this. Yeah.
No, it's minor. I just we went from sea monsters to fish. So all of a sudden I
Oh
just,
yeah, because you and I are well, we're created after the sea monsters, but uh, we're definitely given this responsibility, and it's huge. And we really, our ancestors, I don't think felt that much in control sometimes. I mean, they could get eaten by a lion. It makes you think about the 2,000-year-old man. Uh, um, but the our ancestors were afraid of a lot of stuff, and we're afraid of a lot less on this planet. Our fears are now we're going to destroy ourselves, or that some comet, is going to hit the Earth and destroy everything. But we know there's stuff to be scared about, but we're a lot less scared of the things on this planet than our ancestors were. They had to have been they had to have been pretty scared.
Hey,
All right.
hey,
Yeah.
Mark, one of the
Yeah. We're
things
almost done. Yeah.
I've always liked about Midrash is it is possibly one of my favorite Midrash is the one that talks about the creations after on the after man, human beings,
You're talking about the midnight on the sixth day of creation.
midnight on the sixth day, the
All right. Well,
tongues
so
and
let's
the Shamir, because they're so not like I've taken care of it. We don't have chaos. We have time. We have water. We have land. We have all these nice animals. You can have a nice salad. But you know what? You need tongues. You need a rainbow. You need
yeah. Yeah.
and then it's just two
So what
things.
Judith is getting to is that we have this tradition, this midrash, that at the last minute, right before God, we're going to read this right now. After the sixth day, we're going to read the end of this. And what's interesting is, and we're going to come back to day 4 and day 1, back to the beginning on day 7, is that yeah, God created things that don't follow this order, right? There's things that appear after God seems to be done creating. And so the midrash is that nah, God had this last moment where he created all the things that he's going to pull out and hit us with when we need them, like the plagues, like the shamir that Judith mentioned that helps make the temple, the special worm or creature that helps cut the rock. Yeah, so God created all the supernatural things that we think of them as supernatural. Not really supernatural, because supernatural implies that the order was not finished. Uh, the day of creation sequence that we read is definitely supposed to tell us everything has its place. And so the Midrash follows that, if you will, which is, yeah, and God snuck these things in at the last minute so that you can have these things, which also implies that who knows, maybe there's something else
His
that God created
earthquake
there.
kit, as it were.
Uh,
God might hit you with something else that he created at the last minute just to give you. And you thought that was supernatural. No, God knew. God knew there was a time when we needed it. All right. So let's read day 7. John, why don't you finish with day 7? Or no, Judith. Judith, you finish with day 7 since you love this moment.
Love this moment. The heaven and earth were finished, and all their array.
Right. So it says right there, they're finished, right? God's done. God can't do anymore. Stop. God's done. I gotta
I'm
be
out
done.
of here.
I gotta be done. And I am stepping away and I'm leaving human beings now, right?
On the seventh day, God finished the work that had been undertaken, ceasing on the seventh day from doing any of the work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, having ceased on it from all the work of creation that God had done.
And that's the end of that first story. Now, the next story starts, such as the story of heaven and earth when they were created. Uh, it's a separate story. And we'll talk about why there's a separate story a little bit when we get to the second story. Not appropriate yet to hit you with that until we get to the second story. It's not the time and place. Um, I want to thank everybody for being here. And this is the creation of Shabbat. Because if you hadn't gotten to this end, if you hadn't seen this, the seventh day was when God stopped creating. So what's essentially created on the seventh day? Rest, right? And
Rest. Yeah.
the section that we read right here from Vayhira Vayhivokir Yom Hashishi. There was an evening, there was a morning before we do Kiddush. We technically, or traditionally, we've said this. Vayichulu Hashemayim v'aretz v'chol tzva'am. I know this part by heart because I say it every Friday. Because this is the day that God stopped, and this is the day of day one, creation of time. Day four, the way we mark time, and day seven, the way we sanctify time. So you understand now what Shabbat does. Shabbat closes off creation and time to some extent by saying, and now we have time. Now we have a week. Now we have 7 days. Now we have completeness. And that's why seven, of course, had to be there, right? Seven was the organizing principal number for creation, for shalom, for peace. So we say seven, you have that seven, and that's everything. That's everything. Seven is completion. So seven was a very important organizing principle. It's some would say, well, yeah, because we had a week and that's why. But why? We had seven because ancient people thought seven, and this is where you have the cultural, where this doesn't come out of a vacuum, where seven was important. Now, if you want to say, okay, fine, and that's why they have the seven steps of creation, I'm fine with that, and I not only fine with that, I believe that. I believe the agenda of this story was to create a 7 day account of creation. But look at what it did, is it took everything that we know and organized it and put it into its right place. And what God did is not just create, but organized. God created places for these things. And what God is doing is creating stability. Every time God says it's good, that's stability. I mean, that's okay, and this is how it's going to function. This is the way it's going to run. This is the system. And so the universe is got order to it. It's got there's an inherent wisdom and structure to it. It's not chaos. It's the opposite of chaos. It's God creating um a system that we can go through, and we can have stability, and we can find structure in it, and we can find, hey, now I'm not going to ruin the second state, the second number two creation by telling you that author it will tell us you never know what's going to happen. It's not exactly the opposite, but it's not that concern. It's not the concern with let's make sure everything has its place. Get everybody in the right place. Everything will run like clockwork. It'll all be good. Um, yeah, the J author is he's very human, and he's very much, or maybe she, we don't know. But the J author was somebody who is telling the human story with a lot more warts and all, if you will. It's a lot more, hey, this doesn't quite work always. And what's nice is that our ancestors decided to weave these things together. And that to me is like, that's the human condition, right? The human condition is, gosh, we want there to be order. We want there to be like things that we can rely on. But we also better be prepared for when it doesn't. And what's amazing about this, and again, keep it in mind as we read this, is like people are looking, but is it true? I don't know. But I tell you what is true, that point, which is we have to have stability. We have to have agreed on principles. We have to have semantics. We have to know what we're saying when we say, hey, that's a dog, you know? But you know what? The world is the world, and there's chaos in it, and there's stuff that just doesn't seem to make sense. And that's also okay, because it's got to be okay. Because if we think that things are only going to go the way that the priest wants it to go, we can't cope. So it's a really, really amazing thing. Again, what is it teaching us? Look, if you read the creation story we just read and you were looking for science, then yeah, you're going to walk away going, what a stupid, stupid story. But if you want to know like how old the universe was, you didn't read anything there. But if you want to know why time matters, why time is important, you just read it. If you want to know like what are the stars made of, yeah, you're not going to see that here. But if you want to know what does it matter? Why is it important? Why is there a responsibility for it? Why should we like why we should step back at a moment and every night look at the stars and go, what a beautiful universe we're a part of. How lucky we are to be part of that, to understand that we're part of the same creation. Whether you understand it from a scientific perspective in that moment, or you just say, wow, this is awesome. And that's where it's not anti-science. People are nuts when they make that argument, but it is a sense of humility, a sense of wonder, a sense of appreciation, and hopefully will lead to science and learning more and to wanting to know, but at the same time just being humble about it and saying, wow, that's an amazing universe. So thank you, everybody. Now, I will tell you, I'm going back and forth on this issue of how we're going to structure this class because again, we don't know how long each class will be. Some of them will be an hour, some hour and 20 minutes, some will be an hour and a half, or in this case, an hour and 45. But remember, we did a little bit of pre pre talking about Genesis today. But uh, and by that, I'm also telling you what we had today was a much better discussion. And a couple of people have suggested that we stick to, rather than be hybrid, to stick to online. And I will tell you, if it will create better discussion and better participation, I'm definitely thinking about it. I also, unfortunately, have to be down in San Diego a lot over the coming weeks, so going back and forth was also an issue. So I will tell you, next week I was leaning towards doing it in person, but I'm also telling you, when you're in person, with those who are in person with us, and there's not many who are, but those who are, the people who are out in the ether in the internet world can't hear you, and so it's very hard for us to have an open discussion like that. It's also easier for us to have different readers read. And I want people to also volunteer to read. If you want to read, you don't have to put it out in the group chat, just chat me or text me or write to me independently, because I'm not going to put people on the spot. I'm not going to have people I'm not going to tell somebody, hey, would you like to read? I don't put people on the spot. But if somebody wants to, you can text me in the group chat, in the private chat to me, or text me or write me ahead of time. But I really appreciate that we're doing this a little differently. It was wonderful to have as many people here today with us. And I want to do one thing as we go out each week, not each week, but some weeks I want to go out. I want to go out to a song. And I'm trying to get a song that will be song that you know, but also a song that you maybe can think about when you hear it, maybe think about some of the things that we read. So today I'm going to finish with, as we go out, just a couple of seconds of this song, which I think um, will lead from this week into next week, into the second story of creation, where we talk a little bit more about us as part of the creation. I'll say that. But this is the song we're going to go out to today, and it's this song right here.
Well, I came upon a child of God. He was walking along the road, and I asked him, tell me, where are you going? Yes, he told me. Said, I'm going down to Yesca's farm, gonna join in a rock and rollin'. Got to get back to the land, set my soul free. We are stardust, we are golden, we are building garden, and we got to get ourselves back to the garden.
And next week, we're going to get back to the garden because we're going to be reading the Garden of Eden, and we're going to be reading the fact that that's both where it all started, where the problems all started, and it's also maybe where we became human. So thank you everybody for being here, and just remember, you're stardust. You're part of that universe. Take care, everybody, and thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Rabbi.
you,
Thank
Rabbi.
you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye, John.
Goodbye.
Bye, Judith.
Bye,
Bye.
Judy.